Hello and welcome. I am Exit Light and this is my channel. Today we're going to talk about a ghost ship. I am fascinated by ghost ships, and I think it's because I'm not a fan of deep, dark waters. I'm even less of a fan of being on a relatively small boat in deep, dark waters. And to think about the fact that you could be out in the middle of the ocean, nothing in view, not knowing what is underneath you when you simply vanish without a trace, is something I find bone-chilling. Before we get started, I'd like to thank my subscribers who have sent so many kind messages and your prayers and your thoughts in my direction. I can't tell you how much it has meant to me. If you are not a subscriber, please go ahead and click that button. If you'd like to know when my content goes live, please go ahead and ring that bell. And if you could give this video a thumbs up and share it with people you know and love and maybe don't even like that much, that's fine. It really helps my channel, and I would appreciate that. Alright, let's get started on the KAZ 2 ghost ship. On April 20th, 2007, a white catamaran was found drifting 88 nautical miles off the northeastern coast of Australia. Like the famous story of the Marie Celeste, the crew of the KAZ 2 had mysteriously vanished without a trace, starting an enduring mystery known as the Ghost Ship of Australia. Search and rescue crews upon boarding the ship said that it felt eerie when they entered. An inquest blamed misadventure and bad luck by the crew. But what really happened is a question that will never be fully answered, as 13 years have passed. The crew's bodies remain missing in the Coral Sea. The KAZ 2 crew consisted of Captain Derek Des, Charles Batten, who was 56, and James Alfred Turnstead, who was 69, and Peter John Tunstead, who was 63. All three retired men lived in Perth in Western Australia. Cast off from the Airlie Beach in Queensland, Australia on Sunday, April 15th, in 2007, and they were heading to Townsville on their way to Perth. This would be an 8-week voyage. Townsville is around 270 kilometers to the north of Airlie, and the Great Barrier Reef lies off of its coast. They had previously left Chute Harbor just to the east, but had ended up in Airlie because they had GPS issues. Had bought the KAZ 2 in 2006 for $80,000. He then took sailing courses, and he sailed it a couple of times. Prior to the latest voyage, he then took coastal navigation, radio courses, and a first aid course. The Tunsteads were not nautical novices, since they had sailed together from the time they were 18 years old, and even worked in the radio rooms of the Volunteer Sea Rescue. But they were inexperienced on larger vessels. The last known contact of family members with the crew was made 1.5 hours after it left port, when one of the crew members was contacted by his wife. Graham Douglas, who was the boat's previous owner, had warned the men that they shouldn't leave the Whitsunday area because they didn't seem to have enough experience. He said that the men appeared very nervous about the trip, but they were anxious to get underway since their original start date had been postponed because of bad weather, and the fact that they had trouble understanding the vessel's GPS system. Graham said that, "I said, if you're not ready, don't go." The first indication that there was a problem came on the 18th of April in 2007. It was a Wednesday, when a helicopter reported seeing the KAZ-2 adrift in the vicinity of the Great Barrier Reef. On April 20th, maritime authorities caught up with the boat and boarded it. Strangely, no one was on board the vessel. John Hall, Queensland's Emergency Management Office, QEMO, said that what they found was a bit strange and that everything appeared to be absolutely normal. There was just no sign of the crew. The QEMO revealed that the boat was still serviceable. It was in good condition, and it was laid out as if the crew were still on board. They had food and cutlery, and they were set out on the table. There was a laptop, and it was set up, sitting on the table, and it was turned on. And the engine, well, it was still running. Officials also confirmed that the boat's emergency systems, including its radio and its GPS, were fully functional, and that it still had all of the life jackets on board. There was also a small boat still hoisted on the stern of the boat, and the anchor was up. The only signs that were out of the ordinary seemed to be, other than the disappearance of the crew, that the mainsail had been badly shredded, and that there was no life raft on board. But it was also unknown whether there had ever been one on board. Rescue Officer Corey Benson said that he found an eerie scene when he was winched down from a helicopter to search the vessel. He saw the discarded coffee cup and newspapers. He found knives strewn on the floor. My biggest fear was being attacked by somebody who did not know it was me on the boat. I was 160 kilometers out to sea with no backup. I didn't know if someone was going to burst through a cupboard and go at me with a knife. I saw all the knives on the ground, but no blood, and thought, what the... Search and rescue efforts began on April 18th with boats and Navy aircraft with infrared capability looking in the vicinity of the locations identified in the video and data from the GPS system. At the same time, Bowen Voluntary Marine Rescue launched a coastal and island search. The next day, a full-scale search and rescue effort was launched involving volunteer rescue units from several towns, as well as the Townville's Coast Guard, 2 rescue helicopters, 9 airplanes, and 2 commercial vessels. Dr. Paul Luckin, a survival time expert, was consulted. He concluded that it was unlikely that the men were still alive if they were still in the water, as they had probably gone overboard 3 or 4 days earlier. The team still had hope that the men could have reached land and continued searching until 4 p.m. on April 21st, when the air and sea search was finally called off. Another coastline search was launched on Monday, April 23rd, after some new information had come in, but the search proved fruitless and was called off on April 25th. On Friday, April 20th, KAZ-2 was towed into Townsville Port for forensic examination, and on the next day, Sergeant Bardell and Sergeant Malloy of the Queensland Police Department searched the ship for signs of foul play. They reported that there was no evidence for this, and that they discovered the cabin was neat and tidy, apart from some magazines, a piece of newspaper, and a wine cask, which were lying on the floor. It was later determined that these items ended up on the floor while the ship was being towed to shore. In the sink were a few butter knives, and on the bench in the galley a plastic sheath of fishing knives was found. They did not appear to have been recently used, which is interesting because that is not the description that we heard before. The stories are already starting to veer off. Under Des Batten's bed, in a sealed container, the investigators found a firearm and some ammunition, none of which had been used. In a drawer they found an additional single bullet of the same caliber. After analyzing data from the camera's GPS system, police deduced that it had been steered in a northeast direction into an area where rough seas were building on the day of the departure. Later in the afternoon, the GPS data showed that it was adrift. The investigators also recovered a video recording by James Tunstead on April 15th at 10:05 a.m., shortly before the men disappeared, showing that 1. Des Batten was at the helm with the vessel under sail. 2. The sea was choppy, and none of the men were wearing life jackets. 3. Peter Tunstead was sitting on the aft stairway of the fishing boat. 4. A long white rope can be seen trailing behind the boat. The film showed that the coastline in the area, and this helped investigators pinpoint the exact location of the ship. It was in the area between Gumbarrel Island, Grassy Island, and Armit Island. 4th and 7th, in 2008, an inquest into the men's disappearance began in the Townsville Coroner's Court, led by Queensland State Coroner Michael Barnes. In total, 27 witnesses were called to testify, and 107 pieces of evidence were submitted. Jennifer Batten testified that her husband, Des, was an experienced and careful yachtsman. He had been around boats for 25 years, that he was acutely aware of the need for safety, which is also interesting because he had taken classes on sailing. He had earned his recreational skipper's ticket and a qualification in marine radio. Every summer they traveled together to Rottnest Island on various motorboats, although KAZ 2 was their first sailboat. After they bought it, the couple took a 6-week sailing course and then sailed KAZ 2 around the Whitsunday twice. Apart from a minor problem with the propeller, the trips were without issues. Batten's wife also stated that the original plan was to sail the KAZ 2 to Fremantle as a couple, but that Batten was worried that just 2 people aboard might not be safe. He decided to take his neighbors, brothers Pete and James Tunstead, with him instead. The trip was planned over several months, and they discussed daily as they plotted routes with the help of a computer. They allowed themselves 6 to 8 weeks to get back to Fremantle, but because Des and Peter were retired, it didn't really matter how long they took. They didn't want to sail at night for safety reasons, Jennifer Batten was quoted as saying, and they planned to stay reasonably close to the shore. Although Batten was taking medications for high cholesterol, mild diabetes, and he had suffered a heart attack at the age of 50, she believed that he was well enough and he was fit for the journey. Also heard was Graham Douglas, the previous owner of the KAZ 2. He stated that the boat was in very good condition when it was sold, and that he had met the men the night before they set sail. He also helped the men plan part of their route, but he was surprised to see that, according to the police, the men had deviated from their planned route that was programmed into their GPS system. Gavin Howland, who was a skipper of a commercial vessel called the Jillian, testified that on the 16th of April in 2007, while fishing on a reef off of Bowen, he and his crew saw a white yacht with a torn sail drifting sideways between the reefs through a very narrow passage at up to 3 kilometers in a north-northeastern direction, along with the current. He came within 50 meters of the boat but was unable to spot anyone on board. This was 2 days before the Coast Guard spotted the KAZ 2 adrift off the coast of Townsville, and the day after authorities believed the men went missing. Howland found it odd that a sailboat was in an area noted for its shallow water and rocks. He did not attempt to contact the boat or the authorities. Howland told the inquest that it did not occur to him that the crew of the yacht might be in stress, and went on to say, "It did seem a bit strange to me, but I just have this rule that no one goes near another vessel." Sergeant Paul Malloy, one of the 3 forensic police officers who examined the KAZ 2 after she was towed back to shore, told the inquest that he did not believe that the men had met with foul play. He spent several hours combing the ship for signs of a struggle, but found no evidence that anyone besides the 3-man crew of the vessel had been aboard. "We came to the conclusion that the boat itself was not a crime scene," he told the inquest. After questions by Peter Tunstead's widow Frances as to why the police did not check for fingerprints, Sergeant Malloy said his years of experience told him it was not necessary. "We were there for a long time. We pulled the boat apart, and we found nothing. If there was any indication of foul play, we would have taken every measure we could to examine that boat." The state coroner, Barnes, admits in his official report that he cannot be so definitive about the circumstances under which the deaths occurred. However, based on the eyewitness accounts, the video found on board, and the state of the yacht in which it was found, the report proposed the following scenario. On Sunday, April 15th, 2007, at 10:05 a.m., the KAZ-2 was sailing in the vicinity of George Point. Up to that moment, everything was going as planned, but in the following hour, their situation changed dramatically. The men hauled in the white rope that was trailing behind the boat and bundled it up in the foredeck, possibly to dry, next to the locker it was normally kept in. For unknown reasons, James Tunstead then took off his t-shirt and glasses and placed them on the back seat. The report goes on to say that since the men's fishing lure was found entangled in the ship's port side rudder, an obvious explanation would be that one of them tried to free the lure and fell overboard while doing so. Standing on the boat's sugar scoop platform, a platform at the back of the ship close to the waterline, while the boat is moving is perilous, and falling in the water is easy, but getting back on board is almost impossible. One of the other men then came to the rescue of his brother, while Batten, still on board, started the motor and realized he had to drop the sails before he could go back for his friends. The helm to drop the sails. A deviation of the ship's course or wind direction could have easily caused a jibe, swinging the boom across the deck and knocking Batten overboard. This could have even happened before Batten was able to untie and throw out the life ring to his friends. A blue coffee mug found near the life ring may support this. Since the boat was traveling before wind and at a speed of 15 kilometers, it would be out of reach of the men within seconds. The report states, from that point, the end would have been swift. None of them were good enough swimmers. The seas were choppy. The men would have quickly been exhausted and sunk beneath the waves. The report ruled out foul play or a staged disappearance. I'm just going to address this part real quick. It feels to me like this report really reaches for an answer. That it's basically saying these three highly unlikely events just beat all the odds and happened one right after the other, and therefore killed everybody on board. It doesn't make sense. These were flukes. And to say that everybody on board died because of these flukes that were a rarity, it just feels to me like they were trying to give a reason, answer the question, and to move on. I mean, I don't know why they would have a reason to, but I don't understand this long, drawn-out, feels like made-up explanation of what happened. Just a guess, something they threw against the wall like wet spaghetti. Okay, moving on. Oh, but below, if you'd like to comment and tell me what you think of this report, and if you find it credible or something that could have happened, go ahead and let me know. I'd like to read what you have to say. What are some other explanations for the disappearance of the KAZ-2 crew? Weather? According to authorities in Townsville, the weather had been windy and the sea had been rough between the time that KAZ-2 departed and was found drifting. This led authorities to speculate that the crew may have experienced some form of sudden difficulty during rough weather and had gone overboard. However, one issue with this theory is that the contents of the cabin, including a table, did not seem to be disrupted in any way. Relatives of the missing men say that the boat's condition makes this highly unlikely, and they point to discrepancies such as the fact that the men's fishing lines and laundry were set out, that their life jackets were still stowed, which indicated that they were not experiencing rough weather at the time of their disappearance. Could they have been kidnapped? Also noted was the fact that the KAZ-2 was found with its fenders out, leading to speculation that the boat may have docked with another as yet unknown vessel, to which the crew might have willingly or unwillingly transferred. Hope Hemming, niece of boat owner Des Batten, The fenders were out on the yacht, and the only reason you ever put them out is when another boat comes aside or if you come to rest against a wharf, she is quoted as saying. But Townsville police said that small craft commonly leave their fenders out at all times, making it impossible to draw any definite conclusions. I wonder why they didn't look more closely into that and just brushed it off. Could it be faulty GPS? Volunteer radio operator Ivan Ormez recorded that KAZ-2 radioed in at 6:45 p.m. on April 15th, giving its position as George Point. This is the last known contact with the KAZ-2. It should have taken them a short time to reach George Point, and it's unclear what took them so long to arrive. One explanation could be is that they were just fishing for the whole day and kind of lost track. But another explanation is that they had problems with their GPS since they had already tried to set off on the 14th of April, but were forced to return because of non-functioning GPS. That incident was because of a user error, and it was easily fixed, so KAZ-2 set off early the next day. Could they have lodged on a sandbar? Perhaps the catamaran became stuck on a sandbar near George Point, where the boat's last radio message was made. When the men jumped overboard to push it free, a gust of wind blew and the boat drifted away, leaving them stranded. This would explain why towels were left out on the deck. This seems like another one of those throwing spaghetti against the wall to see if it sticks. Could there have been a freak wave? One crew member may have been washed over by a freak wave, and that the others were lost trying to rescue him. But why the shredded sail? And if that happened, the inside of the boat would have been messed up, tables turned over, etc., in my not professional opinion. Some other theories? There were suggestions that the men staged their own disappearance for insurance purposes. One of the wilder theories was that some kind of paranormal event had happened aboard their catamaran, or it had been attacked by a whale or giant squid. See, I told you, you just don't know what's below you. Or were they abducted by extraterrestrials? So, why was the jib sail shredded? The triangular sail called the jib, which is one of the so-called head sails on a modern boat, was completely shredded when the catamaran was discovered. What would happen to it? We saw that the coroner's report mentioned that as he left the helm to drop the sails, a deviation of the ship's course or wind direction could have easily caused a jibe, swinging the boom across the deck and knocking Batten overboard. However, such a jibe would not have caused the damage to the jib that was found. So, what happened to the men on the KAZ-2? Where'd they go? Were they kidnapped? Were they victims of some, I don't know, mysterious event? Some freak accident? Will we ever know? We might not. Thank you for coming to my channel. Again, if you would please like this video, I would appreciate it very much. Good night.